Hi, this is Taylor at the Public Speaking Blog. Today I'm going to go over using body language as well as using podiums to your advantage during a speech. So the first thing I want to go over is gestures. So when you're giving a speech, you want to be very intentional. I'm going to use that word a lot. You want to be very intentional with how you use your gestures. So don't just constantly be doing this. What a lot of people do, they'll get a nervous tick and they'll do something like that, or they'll something like that, or their hands behind their back, hands like this in their pockets. You want to use your hands to your advantage. If you recall in Talladega Nights, you have Will Ferrell kind of like, I don't know what to do with my hands. So many people do that. It's really common. So oftentimes people will do that without even realizing it. So you look at really good speakers like Barack Obama, and he does a lot of this, very intentional this when he's making a point, or hands like this. And you notice that he only gestures when he's highlighting something with his words. So you don't want to be constantly doing this. It's really distracting. I'm not really doing anything with my hands right now, and it's really hard to even talk because I'm trying to focus so hard on what I'm doing with my hands and my head and my body that now I'm distracting my own self. So imagine how distracting that can be to someone listening to your speech. So intentionality. Be intentional with your hand gestures. So another thing that I want to talk about is podiums, and this sort of ties in with hand gestures. What do I do with my hands when I've got a podium? A lot of people, what they'll do, look at this death grip, and they'll just grab onto the podium, or they'll hang off the podium, or they'll lean on the podium. These are all three things that you don't want to do. Leaning on a podium sort of sets up like a really casual, like, hey, cool kids, I'm cool too. That you look silly, you don't look professional, and you sort of lose a little bit of credibility with your audience when you're just kind of leaning with your leg crossed on a podium. Another thing, the death grip. What this does, in and of itself, it's not terrible, but it prevents you from gesturing with your hands. 9 out of 10 times what I notice, when someone's grabbing the podium like this, they don't leave that spot. They'll give their speech the entire time, and they might want to gesture, but they're nervous, and now they've got this death grip on the podium, and they're not leaving that point of reference at all. So here's the trick that I do, right here. Thumbs on the podium. This is what my favorite public speaking teacher taught me at university. Thumbs on the podium. People from the audience are not going to see this. It doesn't look silly, and you leave your hands open. And I notice that when my thumbs are on the podium like this to start, they don't really come back there ever because I'm using my hands effectively throughout the speech, because they're not inhibited by grabbing a podium or leaning on the podium or grabbing the podium. I have freedom of motion now to do what I want. So start there. What do I do with my hands? Thumbs on the podium. And finally, movement. How do I move effectively? Well, I notice a lot of people pace. They pace. Back in the day, pace. I was in the Marine Corps, pace. And what that does is distract your audience. They're like, where's he going next? I'm watching you. You're making me nervous. Have you ever been in a room or a house where everyone's sitting down and someone's standing up, like in a conversation, and they're kind of pacing back and forth? They make you nervous. And so that's what it does during a speech as well. If you're kind of pacing during your speech, that's not effective. You're not a drill sergeant. You don't have your hands behind your back pacing, and yelling at people. You have to capture your audience and be intentional. There's that word again, intentional with your movements. So hand gestures, intentional hand gestures, intentional movements. So how do you move intentionally? How does that make sense? Well, I mentioned this in a previous video, but what I like to do is when I'm transitioning into another point that I'm making or another time period, let's just say I'm giving a past, present, future speech. Back when I was in elementary school, when I finished that anecdote, I moved, and then I went to middle school. Take a couple steps. And then finally, I found myself in high school. A couple of steps. So now people are with you. They can kind of physically see that you're transitioning into different points. And you can do this during your introduction, your body, and your conclusion as well. And it's very effective because you just stand there and then you move, and in your mind you say, okay, now I'm moving on to the next part of my structure. So you can organize yourself in this way as well. Something you also don't want to do is rock. You don't need to rock. That's really distracting. So the point of using gestures is to not be distracting. Use them to your advantage. If at any point during a speech you're getting nervous and you're grabbing your hands, or you're doing like this, or your hands are behind your back, your hands are crossed, you're immediately closing yourself away from your audience and you're losing their attention. So to wrap this up, use your hand gestures intentionally. If you have a podium, thumbs on it, and then allow yourself to move from the podium. And then when you're moving with your feet, use it to your advantage. Use it to transition into different points. So that way you can track with your audience and your audience can track with you. All right. So that's been my little commentary on using gestures and movement during a public speech. Leave comments below if you have any questions, or email me at thepublicspeakingblog@gmail.com.